The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of the Greenville courthouse, painting the marble floor with golden streaks that contrasted sharply against the cold tension in the air. Lawyers shuffled their papers, spectators whispered in restless curiosity, and the faint echo of footsteps filled the high-ceilinged chamber. At the center of it all stood Kendrick Robinson, a black man in a sharp navy suit, adjusting his tie with calm precision. But his eyes, steady and unwavering, betrayed none of the storm within. Today was not supposed to be just another day in court. Today, a line was about to be drawn between arrogance and accountability, between prejudice and justice. And it all began with one judge who thought his authority could never be challenged. The bailiff's voice rang out, commanding order, and the courtroom doors swung open to reveal Judge Richard Halford, a man whose reputation was as ironclad as the gavel he carried. Halford was known for his stern demeanor, his lack of patience, and beneath it all, an undercurrent of bias that people whispered about but never dared to confront. He strode to the bench, his robe flowing like a dark shadow, and his cold gaze swept over the room before settling on Kendrick. The corners of his mouth curled into a smirk that was just shy of contempt. To him, Kendrick was just another defendant to put in his place. What Halford didn't know was that the man standing before him wasn't a helpless defendant at all. He was a federal prosecutor with a sharp mind and a history of dismantling men who underestimated him. "Mr. Robinson," Halford said, his voice carrying a mocking lilt, "it seems we've found ourselves in quite a situation. Parking violations, late fees, and now contempt of court for failing to appear on time." The judge leaned forward, his tone dripping with derision. "Tell me, do you think the rules don't apply to you?" The room stirred with muffled gasps. To most, it looked like the judge was setting the tone for another easy humiliation. Kendrick, however, didn't flinch. Instead, he raised his chin slightly and studied Halford as though he were analyzing a chess opponent already cornered by their own moves. "With all due respect, Your Honor," Kendrick replied calmly, "I'm here today as both a citizen and an officer of the law. I'm fully prepared to answer for any allegation brought against me." His words, steady and deliberate, rippled through the courtroom. The attorneys in the gallery exchanged looks. Officer of the law? They hadn't expected that. Halford's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered, pounding his gavel once. "This is not your courtroom to grandstand in, Mr. Robinson. Here, you answer to me." The arrogance in his tone was undeniable, but so was the unease flickering in his eyes. Kendrick wasn't playing the role Halford had written for him, and that unsettled the judge in ways he wasn't prepared to admit. The tension grew heavier with each passing moment, the silence broken only by the scratch of pens and the shuffle of restless feet. Kendrick's calm demeanor in the face of Halford's hostility began to shift the atmosphere. People leaned forward, sensing something was unfolding that went beyond routine court business. They didn't know Kendrick's full story yet, but they could feel the weight of it pressing against the walls of the chamber. What no one in the room realized was that Kendrick had spent years building his reputation on exposing corruption and tearing down carefully constructed facades of power. His entire career had been about revealing the truth behind smug faces like Halford's. He hadn't come into that courtroom defenseless. He had come prepared, with documents, precedent, and the law itself at his back. And Halford, arrogant, dismissive Halford, was walking straight into a trap of his own making. But here's where I want to pull you in. Do you think the judge was being fair here, or was he already letting bias cloud his judgment? Because what happened next would test just how much justice truly mattered in that room. As the minutes ticked by, Halford grew more aggressive, slapping Kendrick with a fine so steep it drew audible gasps from the crowd. "Perhaps this will remind you, Mr. Robinson, that no man is above the authority of this bench," the judge sneered, leaning back with an air of finality. He thought he had made his point, that he had cowed Kendrick into silence like so many others before him. But Kendrick didn't move. He didn't protest or raise his voice. Instead, he reached into his briefcase with deliberate slowness, pulling out a folder thick with documents. The bailiff shifted uneasily, the gallery leaned closer, and even Halford's eyes flickered with curiosity despite himself. Kendrick placed the folder on the table, opened it, and slid a single paper forward. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as he spoke. "Your Honor, while you may view me as just another citizen before this court, it is my duty to remind you that I serve as a federal prosecutor under the United States Department of Justice. And as such, I am not only familiar with the law you claim to uphold, I am sworn to protect it from misuse." The silence that followed was deafening. Halford's smirk vanished completely, replaced by a tightening of the jaw. Murmurs rippled through the room, spreading like wildfire. The spectators looked at one another, wide-eyed, realizing they had just witnessed the unmasking of a man they thought was a defendant, but who was, in truth, a force to be reckoned with. And just like that, the power dynamic in the courtroom shifted. What Halford had believed was a simple exercise in authority was rapidly becoming a trial of his own integrity. He tried to regain control, slamming the gavel again. "This is highly irregular," he barked, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Kendrick, on the other hand, sat straighter, his every movement radiating composure. He knew exactly what he was doing, and Halford knew it too. The battle lines had been drawn. On one side, a judge whose arrogance blinded him to the danger of underestimating his opponent. On the other, a prosecutor who had just revealed his true identity in the most public way possible. And as the murmurs continued to ripple across the courtroom, one thing became clear. This was no longer just about parking violations or late fees. This was about something far greater. But what happened next in that courtroom would shock everyone even more. The air inside the courtroom felt heavier now, thick with the weight of realization. Whispers spread through the gallery like wildfire, every spectator leaning closer, their eyes bouncing between Judge Halford and Kendrick Robinson. Moments ago, the judge had been so sure of his authority, his smirk sharp as a blade. But now, stripped of his assumed dominance, Halford's mask cracked. His lips pressed tightly together, his knuckles whitened around the gavel. He had underestimated the man before him, a mistake that was quickly spiraling out of control. Kendrick sat still, his steady gaze locked on the judge, not with arrogance, but with the quiet strength of someone who had nothing to fear. His voice, calm and deliberate, filled the silence. "Your Honor, I respect the bench, but I also respect the truth. You fined me without proper hearing, you mocked me without cause, and you questioned my integrity without evidence. Now, the question is, who is truly in contempt, me or this court?" The words struck like a thunderclap. Some spectators gasped. Others froze in stunned silence. No one had ever dared to speak to Judge Halford that way, not publicly, not with such poise. Halford's cheeks flushed a deep red. His pride was wounded, but his instinct for self-preservation pushed him to regain control. He leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Mr. Robinson, I will not tolerate disrespect in this courtroom. Your credentials may protect you outside, but here, my authority is absolute." He hammered the gavel, each strike echoing like cannon fire. But the more he shouted, the more the crowd saw it. The cracks in his armor, the fear behind the anger. Kendrick's revelation had tilted the scales, and Halford was scrambling to steady them. Kendrick didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply slid another document across the table, the rustle of paper louder than the gavel's echo in that tense silence. "This," Kendrick said, "is a record of every time you've issued excessive fines without due process. I've been following your cases for months, Judge Halford, and today, when you chose to make me your target, you gave me the perfect stage to bring it all into the light." The room erupted into hushed whispers again. Attorneys in the gallery exchanged shocked glances. Some nodded subtly, as if acknowledging what they had long suspected but never dared to confront. Halford froze, his hand hovering above the gavel. His eyes scanned the document, and for the briefest moment, fear flickered in them. But arrogance is a stubborn beast. He slammed the gavel once more and tried to twist the narrative. "You're trying to intimidate this court with theatrics," he spat. "But I will not allow it. His voice faltered as Kendrick rose slowly from his seat, the kind of deliberate movement that commanded attention without a single word. The prosecutor's tall frame cast a long shadow across the table as he adjusted his jacket and spoke with piercing calm. "No, Your Honor, this isn't intimidation. This is accountability, and it's been a long time coming." The atmosphere shifted again, like a storm building. People could feel it. The tide was turning, and Halford was being dragged into waters he couldn't control. Kendrick's revelation wasn't just about him being a federal prosecutor. It was about exposing a man who had hidden behind the robe for far too long. The spectators weren't just watching a hearing anymore. They were witnessing a reckoning. And here's where I'll throw this question to you. If you were in Kendrick's shoes, standing against a powerful but corrupt judge, would you have spoken up like he did, or would you have stayed silent to avoid conflict? Halford desperate to save face, ordered a recess. He stormed out of the courtroom, his robe trailing behind him like a retreating shadow. The gallery buzzed with noise the moment he left, people leaning over benches to whisper, their voices full of disbelief and awe. Some murmured that Halford was finished, others doubted anything would come of it. But one thing was certain, the judge was rattled. Kendrick, however, remained composed. He gathered his papers neatly, slipped them back into the folder, and sat quietly, as though this were just another day at work. But his mind was racing. He knew men like Halford didn't go down quietly. They fought back, and they fought dirty. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. When court resumed, Halford returned, his expression carefully composed, but his eyes betraying the storm inside. His voice was clipped, brittle as glass. "We will proceed," he said, pretending as though nothing had changed, but everyone could see it. His confidence had been shaken. Kendrick resumed his seat, watching, waiting. He knew the judge would try something, some last-ditch effort to reassert control, and he was right. Halford leaned forward, his voice laced with venom. "Mr. Robinson, since you seem so confident in your abilities, perhaps you'd like to explain to this court why a man of your standing finds himself here for something as trivial as a parking violation. Surely someone of your stature could manage to obey the simplest of rules." The jab was meant to belittle him, to reduce Kendrick back to the defendant's chair. But Kendrick didn't take the bait. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but cutting. "Your Honor, do you really want to have that conversation? Because if we're talking about rules, perhaps we should start with the ones you've broken." The crowd stirred, a wave of murmurs rolling through the chamber. Halford's jaw tightened. For years he had ruled his courtroom with intimidation, silencing anyone who dared question him. But today, under Kendrick's gaze, he was the one being cornered. Kendrick lifted another paper from his folder and held it up. "This is a sworn affidavit from a citizen you fined excessively just last month, without granting them the right to appeal. Shall I read it aloud?" Halford's face drained of color. "That's enough!" he barked, his gavel slamming down hard. But the sound no longer carried the same authority it once did. The gallery had seen too much, heard too much. The mask of infallibility had slipped, and what was left was a man exposed. Kendrick didn't press further. He didn't need to. He placed the affidavit back in the folder and sat down again, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to Halford's unraveling composure. The silence that followed was louder than any words. Everyone in the room knew the judge had lost control of his courtroom. But as much as the gallery wanted to believe justice was being served, Kendrick knew better. Men like Halford didn't crumble in a single day. They dug in, they clawed back, they tried to twist the story in their favor, and Kendrick was prepared for that. Because this battle wasn't about one man's pride, it was about protecting the very foundation of justice. Still, no one in that room could have predicted the lengths Halford would go to next. The room was so quiet you could hear the ticking of the old wall clock above the jury box. Judge Halford's hand hovered over his gavel, but for the first time in his career, he didn't dare strike it. The federal observers seated themselves with calm precision, their presence a silent reminder that this was no longer his stage to control. He looked around the room, desperate for support, but the attorneys, the spectators, even his own clerk kept their eyes averted. His grip on power had dissolved in front of everyone. Kendrick remained standing, his calm gaze fixed on the man who had tried to humiliate him minutes earlier. "Your Honor," he said evenly, his voice carrying the weight of truth, "this was never about me. It's about every person who has walked into this courtroom and left feeling powerless. Today, the people finally see the truth for themselves." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gallery. Some nodded, others clapped softly, before the bailiff's stern look hushed them. Still, the energy in the room was undeniable. Halford's face flushed crimson, his jaw clenched so tight a vein pulsed at his temple. But instead of fighting, he slumped back in his chair, the reality sinking in. His reign of intimidation had ended. One of the federal officials rose to his feet. "Judge Halford, effective immediately, we are launching a formal inquiry into your conduct. Until then, you will be relieved of all duties." Gasps erupted around the courtroom. The gavel slipped from Halford's hand, clattering against the bench with a hollow thud. For the first time, he was no longer in command. Kendrick exhaled, slowly, the weight of the moment settling in. He hadn't come here to start a revolution, but sometimes justice had a way of revealing itself when someone refused to back down. He gathered his things and turned to leave. But before stepping out, he glanced back at the gallery. "Remember," he said gently, "power only lasts when people stay silent. When you speak, when you stand, change follows. The room erupted in applause this time, unrestrained, echoing against the walls of a courthouse that had just witnessed history. Kendrick walked out the double doors, not just as a prosecutor, but as a symbol of resilience. A reminder that no title, no robe, no gavel can outweigh truth. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Authority without integrity is nothing more than an illusion. But when courage meets truth, even the most untouchable figures can fall. So let me ask you, should Judge Halford face criminal charges for abusing his position? Or is losing his bench punishment enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this story sparks a debate we all need to have. And if you believe justice deserves a louder voice, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so stories like this one don't go unheard.